Welcome to the Backyard Bouquet Podcast, where stories bloom from local flower fields and home gardens. I'm your host, Jennifer Gulizia of the Flowering Farmhouse. I'm a backyard gardener turned flower farmer located in Hood River, Oregon. Join us for heartfelt journeys shared by flower farmers and backyard gardeners. Each episode is like a vibrant garden, cultivating wisdom and joy through flowers. From growing your own backyard garden to supporting your local flower farmer, the Backyard Bouquet is your fertile ground for heartwarming tales and expert cut flower growing advice. All right, flower friends, grab your gardening gloves, garden snips, or your favorite vase because it's time to let your backyard bloom. Welcome to a special episode of the Backyard Bouquet Podcast. Today, I'm excited to share something a little bit different. Today, I have a pre-recorded interview that was originally part of the Grow Beautiful Dahlias series hosted by Valerie Miller of Steel Cow Lavender Farm. This month-long series features conversations with over 21 dahlia growers, and I'm so honored to be one of them. In this episode, you'll hear Valerie interview me about some of the changes and exciting developments happening at my farm. We recently closed on 20 acres of land, and I'll be sharing a little bit about our plans to transform this fallow hayfield into a thriving ecosystem. You'll also learn more about the Dahlia Patch, my membership community for growing dahlias, as well as how I hybridize dahlias and save dahlia seeds. If you find yourself wanting to hear more from this interview series after listening to today's episode, you can sign up for the entire series through Steel Cow Lavender Farm. This interview series is only available for the month of October. However, Valerie is offering a VIP upgrade for just $27, allowing you to access the replays anytime throughout the growing season. Just check out the show notes from today for a link to the series and for details on how to take advantage of a free month in the Dahlia Patch with the code GROW24. So without further ado, let's jump in and listen to my interview with Valerie. Enjoy.
Hello. Good morning. I think we are rolling. Jennifer, how are you?
Good morning, Valerie. Thanks so much for having me join your series today.
Yeah, this has been so much fun. The Grow Beautiful Dahlia series has been just a delight to talk to all of you growers from all over the country. It's so really cool. For me personally, I have like 20 new friends, and for everyone else listening, it's neat to see and hear the growers talk in a little bit more of a long format. And I don't know, I think it's pretty cool. So thank you so much for joining us.
It's my honor to be here today.
Yay. Okay, so I think you're going to probably do a better job of explaining who you are, where you're located, what your business is, how many dahlias you grow. You have so many exciting things going on right now, and you're like in the midst of all of this change. So will you just kind of give our viewers like a brief overview of all of the stuff?
Absolutely. I am Jennifer Gulizia of the Flowering Farmhouse. I am a cut flower farmer as well as, or I should say I'm a flower farmer located in Hood River, Oregon. I'm also a cut flower garden educator. I hybridize dahlias. I'm in my fourth year of hybridizing dahlias, and I love dahlias. Dahlias are my passion. So this last year I launched a membership called the Dahlia Patch, and we are an online learning community that is everyone from those just getting started with growing dahlias to those who have expanded to 100, 400, or those who are just dipping their toes into roadside stands or farmers markets and are wanting to make the switch from being a backyard gardener to a flower farmer. And then I also host the Backyard Bouquet Podcast, which is a cut flower podcast that features both backyard growers as well as flower farmers. And we tell the stories of those that are growing our beloved flowers.
That's so amazing. You're so busy. I love it. And then you have on a personal, like property level, you have so much change as well from where you were growing last year to now what you will be growing in the future as well.
Yes, this is a big momentous week for us. 6 years ago, we purchased what became the Flowering Farmhouse. We had a white farmhouse, and that was what kind of catapulted my journey into flower farming. And once I got bit by the bug of growing, I always had grown flowers, but once I started growing larger scale, I realized that I needed more land, and it kind of set me off on this path to I want land. And at the time, I didn't quite know what that looked like. Over the last 5 or 6 years, it's kind of been, do I want an acre? Do I need a half an acre? Do I need 2 acres? Since launching my podcast and speaking with growers around the country, I discovered I think I need more land than I originally thought.
Wow. So speaking with other growers is really what catapulted you to go bigger.
Absolutely. Talking to people in the community
So
just, I
helpful.
think, kind of empowers you and
Mhm.
makes you think, oh, if they're doing that, I can too. Or realizing for me, I realized if I only went to an acre, which is what I currently had, I was limiting myself. And by opening up opportunities to look at larger scale properties meant that I wasn't going to necessarily farm bigger immediately, but I had the potential to grow my operation without having to uproot my family again. And then I just think I also wasn't ready previously for more space. So I'm kind of beating around the bush here, but we just acquired 20 acres. So we are now stewards of a 20-acre farm in Hood River. And by saying a farm is kind of a stretch, it's on what's called EFU land, which is exclusive farm use, but it is a fallow piece of land. It used to be a hayfield from like the 1920s to the early 1990s. They grew hay and corn and actually grew sunflowers and had a flower garden for their personal use,
Okay.
which has been really fun learning about the history of the land. But since then, it's kind of just been an abandoned field that gets mowed down each year.
Mhm.
And I mean, for me, soil is everything, and there's not much organic matter right now. There is knapweed and thistle everywhere on the property. So there's going to be a lot of restoration of this land. It's going to be a process. I mean, I don't expect overnight success on this land. We've been on a journey for 6 years now, and we probably have 2 to 5 years of really working on the soil and rebuilding the fertility here so that we can build a thriving flower farm at our new location.
Oh, that's so amazing. Do you have a house on this piece of property as well? Or do you have
There
to do
is a
that as
house.
well?
There's a mobile home. It's a manufactured home that unfortunately has had at least one fire. It almost looks like there's maybe been 2 fires on it. We noticed yesterday we had the land excavated. There were blackberry bushes that were overhead high, so we couldn't even walk parts of the property. And now
Oh,
that they're gone, we're like, oh, it's even slanted. And I've shared a few pictures. I'm working on a blog post where I'll share some more, but the
uh-huh.
place is not livable. We don't even have a key to the inside. It needs to be torn down. But the way that our zoning works is that if we tear it down, we only have 12 months to replace it. So we're not in a position to
Right.
replace it yet.
Yeah.
Uh, we were going to donate it for a learn to burn, but we're learning that DEQ, which is the Department of Environmental Quality, has some very high standards and strict rules for burning something down. And we want to be very responsible stewards as we take on this project. So we're trying to figure out, does it make sense to burn it down? Can we safely burn it down without harming the environment? Because that is the one thing our county does allow. If you do donate to the fire department, you can have an indefinite approval to rebuild.
Okay.
This is that 12.
Oh,
Yep.
that's super helpful. Yes. Wow.
So right now we're living offsite. We're about 10 minutes from the farm, which presents its own set of challenges, but we know it's temporary. And right now we're getting a fence put up to keep the cougars and bears and coyotes
Oh my
on the
gosh.
land.
Sounds so exotic with all of the regulations. I feel like in Iowa, we can do so much more without, I don't know, there's just not as much stuff and then not nearly as many wild animals to keep out the cougars. Holy cow. Yes.
So we want to feel safe. We want our 9-year-old to be able to safely run around the property and not be wondering if there's a cougar prowling in the tall grass nearby or something, or even myself or our dog to like 30 pounds.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yes. So we're getting there. We're literally just taking it step by step, and everything is figure outable is what we have realized.
Oh my
It's
gosh. Absolutely. Yes. And I would imagine too, when you start to have your head in the future and more in the future and the more in the future, it's good to plan, but that's where so much anxiety is. So you can only do what you can do that day or that week. And I feel like for me personally, when I come at that mindset, it's much easier to handle and take on all these things.
Absolutely. So yeah, part of us, we're living in this future of like, what do we want it to look like? But also, what do we need to do now? So, I mean, everything is very strategic that we're doing right now. And it's hard because you want to just dive in and plant everything at the same time. It's like, if this is our forever home and our forever farm, how do we strategically do this so that when we're 70 years old, we're also going to want to keep farming this land?
Yes. Oh my gosh, so many good questions. And yeah, what a good way to approach things. So maybe not hurry through the things that you want to hurry through because, yeah, you will be living with these decisions for such a long time.
Yes. So the quick things are like, let's get all the trash off the property. But in terms of like, where are things going to go? We're going to watch this winter. There's a lot of erosion on the land.
Okay.
So it was like, I thought I was going to put my dahlias in a specific spot, but now we need to watch this winter and the spring, how wet that space gets, because there are some wetlands. They're not designated wetlands, but because of erosion over the last 25 years, we do have to really carefully watch and see, like, is this spot going to get a lot of water? We're working with a nonprofit called Contour Lines. We actually have a grant for 1,000 trees. We probably have, I think there's like 10 oak trees on these 20 acres, and then there's a few poplar trees. But otherwise, it's 20 barren acres. And so we're getting a grant for 1,000 trees and woody perennials. And we're going to be planting them to the contour lines of the earth. So versus planting like in straight rows, we're going to plant them on the contours to help collect rainwater and help with some of that erosion. So it actually looks like we'll be building a couple ponds. Hopefully, we don't know if they'll be year-round ponds or if they'll be seasonal ponds, but it's going to be exciting because maybe we'll have ducks or be able to have not wildlife, but farm animals that can utilize that water.
Oh, that's so cool. My parents had a piece of property that they bought that was like 80 acres many years ago. And it was farmed commercially for many, many years. And my dad basically just wanted to make it this giant oasis of wildlife. And so they did. They worked with some of our government organizations here in Iowa. And they put a lot into wild prairie and then they put a lot into nut plantings. But they ended up through the course of what they were doing, putting 2 ponds in as well. And it's so much fun going there. And one of them does have a stream running through. So they stocked it so we can go fishing. But just the amount of wildlife that comes, like, so right now it's all barren. And then there's going to be so much goodness and so many creatures that will come and live on your land just because in the course of however many years, you're going to be making it into this really great spot. That's really lovely to think about, Jennifer.
Thank you. So our hope is to show, I really believe in education. So one of our missions is that we want to show that right now we're starting with this land that is just dirt. And soil is so important to our livelihood, to our plants. So we want to show that we can take this dirt, heal the soil, and in the process, we can create something really beautiful with the flowers. So,
oh, I love that. Okay, that brings me to so many questions.
Perfect.
And we will definitely be respectful of your time, so I won't get to all of them. But just from our conversation so far, what are you going to do? And you don't have to go in like super big depth, but if someone had like a super barren piece of land, whether it was 20 acres or even honestly just a patch, because some of us that have yards, like I've got a couple patches in my yard that just really is not great. Like, what would you suggest doing to kind of bring some life in from that dirt to make it into this wonderful soil of all of this stuff?
Sure. Well, what we're doing that I would recommend for anyone, whether you have a 1/4 acre, small backyard, or 20 acres like us, is really understand what you're starting with. So we are starting with the soil test. We're having to wait for a little bit of rain to come. It's been super dry. So we were told that by waiting, we'll get better soil tests. So we're supposed to get rain starting in 2 days from now. So in about a week, I'll be able to take some samples, have them sent in, but we're going to do a soil test that also tests organic matter to see if we're starting with organic matter. But I know by just digging a hole and watching that hole, there is 0 worms in our soil. There's no signs of life other than the knapweed and the thistle. And both of those are signs of compacted soils. So understand, what is your soil health? Like if you have really great soil to start with, you're going to be able to grow a lot. But if you're like me and you're starting with soil that maybe isn't even soil, it's just dirt, that top layer has really been eroded away, how can you quickly build that up? So for us, I can't even barely get a shovel into the ground. It's ridiculous. Like if you watch me try and jump on a shovel, I'm going nowhere with it because the ground is so compacted from years of tillage. So we are going to have to till one time. And we have to let the ground get a little bit softer first, a few rains. So hopefully next week we'll be doing our one and only till is the goal. And we're going to cover crop. We are going to cover crop the entire property. And so we're going to do a blend of probably somewhere between 7 and 9 different cover crops. So things like hairy vetch, clover, mustard seed, buckwheat. I'm going to be working with a soil agronomist to really truly figure out what our soil needs instead of just guessing. I don't want to guess and say, let's throw a little bit of this, because you can quickly start throwing away a lot of money at the wrong things. I do need to plant right away. So for me, I'm going to bring in some compost. If you're planting in raised beds, if you do like a 50-50 blend of an organic mix, that's you don't even necessarily need to do a soil test if you're bringing in a 50-50 blend in a raised bed. Whereas if you're planting in your ground, knowing what you're starting with is going to tell you what amendments to add. So do you need more organic matter? Do you need more nitrogen? Do you need more calcium? What is your soil needing? And so those tests will tell you. And different things need different levels of elements in the soil too.
Yes.
Or different nutrients, I should say. So what I need is going to be different than what you need in your soil.
Yeah. And then even depending on, when you get a little bit further down, depending on if you're growing peonies or if you're growing the dahlias or something else, they're going to need different things as well.
Exactly. And then are there like chemicals? Like for us, we did have to test, and thankfully our land has never been used to store orchard chemicals, but we're in a high orchard area.
Interesting.
So we don't have those toxins in our soil, but we could have. And then if so, do you need to plant something like sunflowers that pull toxins out of the soil? Which we actually still are going to do. We're going to plant because we have more land than we can plant. The best piece of advice is don't leave anything barren. So that's why we're cover cropping. You want to always be feeding the microbes in the soil to rebuild that soil biology. And so we're going to put sunflowers in. We're going to have buckwheat. It's going to be colorful because we're going to be trying to feed those microbes to bring back life into the soil.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. Just on another level, if you are growing the dahlias and you have to dig them up every year, and then you have this like row, however long it is, or rows, depending on what type of a grower you are, and they're going to be barren until you plant next spring. Do you throw some seeds in there like clovers or a buckwheat, or do you put something in after you dig your dahlias, or do you just let it go?
Well, my last growing space was lease land.
Okay.
And we were using that space for the last 3 years. And there was so much, I called it dinosaur grass. I don't know what kind of grass it was, but it has this root system that basically is to keep the soil from eroding away. And so it sends these long tap roots. And so cover cropping, while I did do some of that, I planted mustard seed and buckwheat. I also had a silage tarp. So when my dahlias came up, I was silage tarping to try and kill off. I would first put down the compost, and then so I would feed the soil, and then I would cover it with a silage tarp of where the dahlias were going. And by the third year, I noticed a huge decrease in that because what was happening is that grass the roots were so thick that they could actually bore through my dahlia tubers, and they would wrap around them and strangle them.
Holy cow.
Yeah, it was terrible. And so that goes back to understanding what is the structure of what is already on your land. So if you don't have that problem, then if you can easily just scratch up the surface, you don't even necessarily have to till. If you can scratch in some seeds. So it's fall. If you're not freezing yet, you could still plant some mustard seed or some hairy vetch or some clover to add some nitrogen into your soil. And so the idea is, and I'm not an expert on this. I hope to be someday. So I'm still learning with a little preface there. But the idea is you want to grow your cover crop, and then you want to cut it down before it goes to seed until it not till it, but you want to mix it back into your soil. So you want to feed that to your soil so that as it breaks down and decomposes, that's the organic matter that you're adding to your soil.
Yeah. Oh, so that's so good. Because some of us know that just because we heard it somewhere else. But when you're first learning about it, it's all kind of confusing. It doesn't really make sense on a like surface level.
Yes. So that's one of the hard things I'd say about growing dahlias from a standpoint of caring for the earth is you don't want to leave the ground barren, because when you're taking those tubers out, when you're taking all that organic matter, you're leaving nothing there for the microbes. So cover cropping is that way that you can continue feeding them when your dahlias aren't growing right there.
Yeah, I'm going to try that this year. We'll see. It seems like I usually always take my dahlias out after it's freezing and it's so cold, and then it gets so cold right away, so nothing will grow no matter what. But still, it's good to maybe have something. So
You could cover with a silage tarp, or you could
yeah,
in February.
Mm-hmm.
In February, you could put some mustard seed down, and so then it starts growing, and it's a pretty quick growing. Or depending on how warm you get, buckwheat for me tends to be a warmer cover crop, where the mustard seed, I noticed that if I scattered in February, it starts to grow in March and April, and I don't have dahlias till May, so then I have time to terminate it and work it into the soil before I plant the dahlias.
Awesome. Thank you. That's so helpful.
Yeah.
Hearing about all of this stuff. Okay, so let's circle back to just a little bit about land selection and like how do you decide what it is that you want? So I would imagine the number one reason to get anything, you'd have to really kind of think about what you want to grow and what level you want to grow. So that's a very difficult decision that really only you can figure out for yourself.
Totally.
And then from there, do you have some specific advice on what dahlias really love? Like maybe I just have a big farm. Maybe I'm growing conventional crops and I have places that I could put dahlias, but I really don't know where they would best live. Or maybe I'm a grower and I want to go bigger and I want to buy a piece of separate land like what you are doing. So what would you be looking for?
Sure. Well, that's kind of a two-part question. So
It is.
when you're looking for a location to actually put your dahlias in the ground, you want a spot that gets full sunlight. It has well-draining soil. Dahlias were traditionally from the mountains of Mexico. So they don't like extreme heat. So when it gets above 90 degrees, your dahlias start to get stressed out. When it's 100 degrees, your dahlias kind of shut down and they're like, what are you doing to me? And they go into survival mode. So if you're wanting to if you have a sunny spot that's like up against a metal building, that's going to reflect the heat. That's probably not the best place to plant them. Or if you get shade all day, I did kind of experiment this year and I've got one row that's growing in the shade and the dahlias are like as tall as me, all of them, if not 8 or
they were stretching.
They were stretching for the sun, but that's not always the best either. However, we had a really hot summer and that row seemed to do better for me because they did get some shade. They were the first to get, or they were the last to get sunlight and the first to get evening shade. So they probably got about 6 hours of sunlight a day, where ideally you're going to want your dahlias to be in full sun all day. They need well-draining soil. If the tubers sit in a bunch of water, they're going to start to rot. And you want good soil too. You want that balanced pH. I think they say it's about a 7. So pretty neutral soil. So you don't want heavy clay. If you have heavy clay, you can amend it with compost. And then as far as finding that space, if you have a backyard that's maybe really heavy clay, you could build some raised beds and bring in a 50-50 blend that's soil and compost. And then you already have that organic matter in and you can plant straight into that. And your dahlias will be super happy. If you have maybe a quarter or a half acre and you're planting them in the ground, you're going to go back and look for where is it sunny? Where is that soil well draining? So like a low point on your land with sitting in water, if it's all muddy, that's not going to be a great spot for them to grow. So you want good drainage. Now, if you love dahlias like me and you got bit by the bug and you had, like I had room for 200 on my land. And as I grew, it's like, I don't have any more room. What do I do? I looked around me. And through my podcast, I've heard so many great examples of other people. So for me, I was fortunate. I was in a new neighborhood. I had 1/3 of an acre. My backyard neighbor had almost an acre, and my neighbor to the west of me had 2 acres of land. So I first went, because I knew my neighbor Becca, who owned an acre. She had part of her land landscaped, and then she had this back strip that just had poppies growing through it. There was nothing in it. And I said, what are you doing with this land? And she said, well, I used to have a vegetable garden, but now that I've grown in my position at work, I don't have time to tend to it anymore. So I've let this space go. I said, well, do you think we could work out an arrangement where I could lease this land from you? So you don't want to go into spending a ton of money to lease land because dahlias aren't going to produce a ton of money, especially if you're getting started. So we worked out an arrangement where I helped pay for her irrigation. And then I provided her with a weekly bouquet of flowers during my CFA subscription. So it was a win-win for both of us. I beautified her property. I improved her soil because I brought in, I don't know how many yards of compost. I've been using that land for 6 years or 5 years now. So for 5 years, I've been amending her soil. There's been dahlias growing. It's also really a beautiful site. So I would say, though, that when you're leasing someone else's land, do everything you can to keep it looking really good all the time because it's easy to let a garden get messy. So make sure that you have the time and bandwidth to keep up someone else's space. And make sure you're in agreement on what that looks like, because obviously, like for me, in the wintertime, I don't like to cut back my dahlias I cut back my dahlias to pull out the tubers, but like I'll leave my zinnias and my marigolds because they feed the birds over the winter time. And so some people might say, oh, that looks terrible. Or at first, my husband would ask me, why are you leaving the T-posts up all winter? It's like a field of T-posts. I said, look how many birds perch on them so they can safely eat all the marigolds and zinnias. It's providing a haven for those. So if you're going to do that, make sure that whoever you're leasing from is also okay.
Yes. No, that's
that model.
Right. Yeah. Because some people like to chop everything down at the end of September or October. And that's a totally different look than leaving it for the nature and the wildlife.
Yes, absolutely. And then if you're wanting to grow bigger, I think it's just looking at what can I lease? And that's a big can of worms, is making sure that you have a legal document to protect yourself. Both parties should be protected. So does your lease agreement state who are the parties? What happens if something happens to one of those parties? How long do you have to get out? Or does your lease carry over to the children or the new owners? What other things would be good to look at? So, like a month to month is a really dangerous thing if you're leasing land and growing flowers, because what happens if all of a sudden they decide in July and you have 1,000 dahlias and they want you out in a month? Are you going to move all your dahlias? Are you going to dig them all up and take them with you?
And I do want to reiterate this lease part. I didn't think of it in the flower aspect because we've always just owned our land. So it hasn't been something that's been applicable to us. But so I'm obviously an artist and I talk about that a lot in the series because it's who I am. But we went through 2 fires in the last 3 years, and our lease agreement that we honestly had with ourselves. So my husband and I own our building, and it's a big building. And then our company is a separate C Corp or S Corp, and they lease the property from Val and Josh Miller. And so we had a lease set up, even though it's essentially both of us, but they're 2 separate entities. We had a lease set up that if anything happens, AKA a fire, the company is responsible for all of the contents in the building. And because of that, we basically had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of extra insurance that we used almost every penny of in the fire. And without that, it just would have all been personal property and it wouldn't have been protected. And we would have been in such a giant mess. It would have not even been funny. So some of these things are just so easy to set in place at the beginning.
Absolutely. And it's so easy. I've talked on the podcast with one person who leases a whole bunch of fields of their neighbors. So like they went around, this was Dee from Mermaid City Flowers. She went around and she's like, see, you have this grass area in your yard that you're not really taking care of. Could I take this over for you? Which is genius. So she has like 5 or 6 plots around town that she can literally walk to carrying her wheelbarrow and manage them. And then all of the neighbors are getting these beautiful flower field gardens that she's taking care of, and she's able to make money off of them. We did not get into the legal aspect, but what I could see happening is if you all of a sudden thought, oh, my neighbor's got this burnt grass that they're not taking care of. What if I went to them and I worked out an agreement? Well, shaking hands is not going to protect you legally. You're putting your flowers on someone else's land. And I'm not a legal advisor. So
Right. Exactly. Yes.
this
None
is
of us
just my
are.
experience that I'm talking
Mhm.
from. But you really want to protect yourself. Both parties should protect themselves and have an understanding. And the thing I've learned, if you don't exchange money, do you really have a legal lease? So you probably should compensate. There needs to be some sort of compensation for the land, whether you're giving them flowers, are you helping with the water cost? Are you paying a flat fee? And I'm not talking about thousands of dollars a month. Like when we started looking for land, when we lost our last piece of land, I had someone offer me land for like $1,100 a month. Well, that doesn't pencil out growing flowers. So make sure that even if you're really excited, does this pencil out? Can I make a return on this?
Mhm.
Especially if you're trying to grow for profit. Like if you're just doing it as a hobby and you have a bunch of extra money and you don't need to make a profit, maybe that $1,100 won't be a big deal to you. But if you're trying to make a profit, you're not going to make a profit when you're paying someone $1,100 a month for lease land.
And I would also just add in one little thing too. It would also, in your lease, you would want to address if they're spraying for bugs or if they're spraying their property at all. I know a lot of people around where we live, they love to have their yards sprayed for bugs. And sometimes we get like an overdrift from the neighbors and it kills some of our flowers. So you don't want to be, but you want to at least address this. So you don't want to be growing your patch of dahlias in the middle of their yard where they spray for everything. And it may or may not harm the ones that you're planting.
Yes, that's a good point. So yeah, make sure that there's no spray taking place. Have agreements about water usage, especially if you're having to share it. Like
Mhm.
have access to water at certain times of day, or are you competing for water with what they're also using, or do they have a source of water that you can use on the property? There's a whole host of things. So I really advise that you have a legal attorney or someone that has the legal background help you draw up a contract. And then how long is the lease? And so it should be, do you have it through the growing season? If you don't have it leased through the growing season, I would be concerned. But beyond that, what happens when the lease ends? Uh, I only had 90 days, which I would never do again. That is not enough time to get your flowers out of the ground and clean everything up without killing a bunch of stuff. So I talked to one grower who had actually she was given her lease said that she would be given 2 years notice from the time that her lease was ending, which gives you plenty of time you're still paying during those 2 years and you still have those 2 years, but that gives you time to look for a new piece of land, also start digging your stuff up. The other thing I would probably not do if I was to go back in time, I wouldn't plant perennials. So something like dahlias where you're digging them up every year, you can take those easily with you. But when you're trying to dig 500 peonies in the middle of winter, I can tell you from experience, it's not easy and it's not fun.
Mhm.
Or it's your lilacs. I killed a bunch of lilacs digging them up.
Sure.
So think about, what are you putting in the ground? Are you okay leaving them when the lease ends if you can't dig them up? And are you allowed to leave them?
Mhm.
It's another important thing to ask, and making sure that that's discussed. Like when the lease ends, are you allowed to dig up your perennials? Are they part of the property because they are permanently growing in the ground now? So many questions to ask. I mean, we could talk for hours just about.
Right. Yeah. I feel like we can probably wrap up this section, but yeah, that is so many good points. Like I said, I've never been in that spot, but I know a lot of people that are watching probably will be, whether they know it now or not. And
Absolutely.
yeah, it's so good to think about these things that you wouldn't normally think about. So
The last thing I'll say real fast about that, though, is I don't want to scare anyone from leasing because it's a great way to test the waters before you go and
Mhm.
spend a bunch of money on your own land. So if you don't have land, leasing is a great way to get your feet in the water and test it out and say, do I want to grow commercially
Mhm.
before you actually make the investment in farmland?
Yeah, that because I don't know what the statistics are, but I feel like there's a huge percentage of people that do want to go into flower gardening or flower farming that do. And then 3 years later, 4 years later, they realize, oh, whoa, this is not for me. It was fun while it lasted, but I don't really want to continue.
It's not just all flowers. There's a lot of weeds.
Yes, there are indeed. And bugs.
Yes.
Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit. I'm going to reference my notes so I can kind of stay on topic. You have so many good things to share. And like I said, we could talk about this all day long, but we probably shouldn't because we have other things that we need to do. Um, let's switch gears to the seed saving. So
Sure.
you have been hybridizing your dahlias for, what did you say, 4 years?
This is my fourth year growing from seed. I'd say it's
Okay.
probably my third year of like truly going down the hybridizing route versus buying other people's seeds, saving my own seeds, planting
Okay.
my seeds, growing them out, evaluating them, all of that good stuff.
Okay. So let's just start from the very tip top because I know I've mentioned this before, but I don't think I actually explained it. What does hybridizing dahlias even mean?
Sure. Well, so dahlias are traditionally grown from tubers. When you plant a dahlia tuber, you are growing an identical plant from the mother parent, from the mother or the parent plant. So you know exactly what you're going to get. When you grow dahlias from seed, it's like Christmas morning for a dahlia breeder or someone that loves dahlias because you don't know what you're going to get. Dahlias are octoploids, so they have 8 sets of DNA. And just because you have a red dahlia that you save seed from doesn't mean you're going to get a red dahlia. You might get a white dahlia or a yellow dahlia. There's so many combinations in the genetics that it is so fun to see what you're going to get as you start getting into dahlias. And being a hybridizer is where you are breeding dahlias, meaning you are saving the seeds. You can either work with the bees, let the bees be the heroes, and they can cross-pollinate for you, and then you collect the seeds. Or you can actually collect the pollen yourself and cross-pollinate by hand pollinating. Where I am, we get too much rain too early in the season. Our season is not long enough for me to have much success with the hand. So I selectively breed by placing plants next to each other, isolating them from the rest of my dahlia patch, so that I can let the bees control the pollination. So I will, let's just say, for example, I took Cornell Bronze and Blizzard, and I could say, I like both of these dahlias. I could isolate them by putting them 100 feet away from the rest of my dahlias, and I could just leave them alone, let them go to seed, and the bees will hopefully cross-pollinate the two of them because they're right next to each other. So by hybridizing, we are trying to create new varieties of dahlias. And it's a process. It's not like you save the seeds and you grow it out and you say, I've got a brand new dahlia, and you bring it to market the next year. Hybridizing involves first you collect the seeds. So first you plant your dahlias and you're strategic about what am I trying to save seed from? What characteristics am I liking? Even though they're octoploids, some of the traits are still going to pass down from the parents. So do you like that it's a ball shape? Does it have a good sturdy stem? Do you like the face positioning of the dahlia? So is it sitting at a 45-degree angle versus face down? Looking for really strong character traits and then saying, I'm going to save seeds from these plants. So that's year one. Year two, you plant out those seeds and you say, okay, this one is a bobblehead and it doesn't have a very strong stem attachment or it's facing down. I'm not going to keep that one. So you're selecting ones that have strong traits. So you might find a beautiful ball and then you're going to evaluate it and say, are there other dahlias already out there that look exactly like this? Do I need to bring another white ball dahlia that looks identical to something else into the world? Or I've got this really beautiful blush dahlia that looks like nothing else that we've seen on the market before. I'm going to save this one because that is year one that it's grown out. I'm going to hope that it makes good tubers. I'm going to hope that I can overwinter it without any problems. I'm going to evaluate those because those are characteristics. Does it make good tubers? Does it store well over winter? And then in year two, I'm going to evaluate, does it stay true to the form of the first year? Because their genetics are still unstable. So as I watch in that second year, if the genetics stayed stable, okay, then my third year, I'm going to start producing more of that variety. And I'm still going to watch because they're still not necessarily fully secure. So are those genetics still changing? So if it stays stable in year three, all right, I maybe could release it in year four, but I might want to build out my stock more. Most hybridizers will wait usually till year five before releasing the stock. So it is a process. It's a labor of love. It's many years of babysitting and really mothering over that dahlia to make sure that it stays healthy. You don't want pests to get on it. You are sanitizing your shears between each cutting so you don't introduce any disease into the plant. And so you're watching all of those character traits. So hybridizing is a multi-year process to bring a new dahlia to market.
Yeah, that's so crazy. So how long does it take for it to actually be stable? 1, 2, 3, 4? Like what is that?
From what I've heard, and I mean, I'm still fairly young in my hybridization career
Yeah.
compared to some of the experts that have been doing this for 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
Mhm.
But what I've heard from those that have been doing it longer than me is usually by year 3, it's starting to settle. It's pretty rare for them to change in year 4 is what I've been
Okay.
told.
Well, that's good to know.
So,
Yeah, that's
but yes,
amazing.
you wouldn't want to take a first year and start dividing it and telling your friends start growing this out because it couldn't even
Mhm.
take. And you want to introduce something to the market that's going to retain its strong characteristics.
Yeah. Okay, so when you do take the seed, how does that process work?
So once a dahlia blooms,
Mhm.
instead of harvesting it and bringing it inside, you're going to let it continue to open up. So as it continues to open, the petals start to open, and you'll see those little yellow pollens that are the stamens on the dahlia. And that is where the bees are going to come in and pollinate. So they're going to go from one flower to another and cross that pollen. After time, as it stays out in the field, the petals are going to start to fall off of your dahlia. Sometimes you have to help them. I'll start walking through the field and start gently brushing off some of the back petals.
That's what I was
The flower can close up because you don't want your flower to close up with the petals still attached. For me, I've noticed that if the petals stay on as it closes up, several things can happen. One, I can get moisture inside the seed, which can lead to things like rot and fusarium, but also
Mhm.
it gives pests an opportunity to crawl inside. And there's nothing worse than harvesting a seed pod and opening it up in your house to find out that you have thousands of little larvae of like army worms crawling around and have eaten all of your seeds.
Oh, right.
So you need to let it close up. It can be a little bit tricky in places like the Pacific Northwest where I am. If we get rain, you don't want rain to settle in them. They need to be able to dry out. So we call it, I think others call it this too, is I say I'm milking the seed pods. And I literally will kind of cut my pointer finger and my thumb and I'll put
Uh-huh.
the base and I'll just go through and I'll squeeze them to make sure that there is no moisture coming out. And
Oh.
so you're helping them start dry out. If you're in a drier region, they tend to dry out faster on their own. But for me, I really have to go through and I'm doing little parentheses with my fingers, milk them in a sense where you're squeezing out kind of that brown little liquid so they start to dry out. And then as they start to close up, they'll start to get a black tip. And you can actually very carefully, you'll start to recognize it where you won't have to do this every time. But if you start to put your finger or your thumb down, you can start to feel the seed pods or the seeds forming on the inside. And so, what I'll do at that point is I will cut them off the stem. I'll keep the stem attached and I'll put them in water and I will label what that is because I want to know where my seeds came from so I can track the lineage of them and watch for characteristic traits. So, now that I'm in my 4th year of doing this, I'm just pretty much saving seeds for my own stock at this point.
Mhm.
I can really start to see different characteristics coming through. Or it was interesting. I had a dahlia that I had crossed with a cafe au lait
Mhm.
initially, and the seedling looked nothing like a cafe au lait. It looked more like the other parent. And then this year, its seedling from the seedling looks so much like a cafe au lait that it's neat to
Did that?
see how that lineage comes back
Yes.
around with the traits. So by keeping really good notes of those as part of being a hybridizer versus just a seed collector or a seed grower, I would say. But so once it starts to dry out, I will, for me, because my season's so short from when they start to go to seed to when I can collect them, I'll bring them inside. I'll put them in a vase. For those that are watching with the video portion here, directly behind me, I have some that are just sitting in a glass vase and I let them start to dry out. Once I feel that they're dry, I'll then pop the seed pod off the stem. I usually use a piece of aluminum foil or a cookie tin works really well and I'll separate them off. So I'll take the petals and the chaff off and I'll separate the seeds. When you're collecting seeds, you can hear me kind of shaking them. I'll put them
Mhm.
in a Tupperware and let them dry out for about 36, 48 hours before I put them in a seed envelope. And then once they're dry, I'll store them in a seed envelope and I'll label what the seed parent was so that I can keep tracking them for the next year. But when you save them, what you should be looking for is you want firm seeds that when you touch them, they're not flat. So it's really hard to see because they're so small, but you want them to have almost a little bit of a bump in the center. You want them to, it's not really meat. And it's funny that I say that because I'm a vegetarian, but you want there to be a little bit of a thickness or a bump to feel that they are actually ripe seed pods or seeds versus just flat. And so they start to turn a little bit darker. So they'll get a little bit of a black. Sometimes they have a little bit of a purple hint to them, but they can come in all different sizes. Let's see here if I bend the computer screen, but they're
Oh, yeah.
a little bit bigger than like an apple seed, probably about the thickness of like a little apple seed, where I mean by the bump on them. So you want, if they're perfectly flat, you might not have a viable seed. So for a viable seed, you're looking for a little bit of meatiness to them, showing that they're ripe and they're ready to go.
Yeah. Oh, that's so very cool. And then when you start them in the spring, then I would imagine is when you start them, just like your other flowers. And you start them similar to your other flowers and probably cover them up with dirt a little bit and then let them go and plant them in your garden and see what happens.
Sort of. So
I know nothing about this, so I'm glad that you're filling us in.
Yes. So a lot of people get really excited because it's like Christmas. You want to start them. Christmas passes and you're like, okay, I need this excitement. I'm going to start my seeds. Well, if you start your seeds right after Christmas, you're going to baby them for a long time and they're going to get really leggy. So you want to start your seeds about 4 to 6 weeks before your last frost date.
Okay.
And then I always wait at least a couple weeks after I plant my dahlia tubers before I bring my seedlings outside. So I use a coffee filter. I like to use a brown coffee filter and I use a spray bottle. I mist it down. I open up the coffee pod and then I put and you can do this with a paper towel too. I like the brown craft coffee pods because I can see when the seeds sprout. Because when they sprout, they have a white root coming off of them. And it's a lot easier to see that than when it starts to grow into a paper towel and then you can break the root. So for me, I use the craft coffee and then I spray it down. I sprinkle my seeds in. I usually put about 20 seeds on now my mind's blanking on what you call it, the coffee filter. Sorry. Another cup of coffee this morning. And then I moist it and then I close it up. So they're closed in on this to keep the moisture in. You don't want them too wet though. If you can squeeze water out, your seeds are going to start to rot. And then I put them in a Ziploc baggie. On the Ziploc baggie, I write the name of the parent on it and the date that I started them. And then I put them on a tray and I put them on top of my fridge. You want them somewhere dark and warm. You don't want them too hot. So like putting them on a seed starting mat might make them rot because it might get too hot. So I just put them on top of my fridge. And after about 3 to 5 days, I'll check on them. For me, from my own personal experience, I found that the earlier ones that start to sprout often are the open-centered ones. So I've had some take as long as 2 weeks, but after 3 days, I start checking. And then barely as they start to sprout, I'll take them out of the coffee filter and I will very carefully, you'll see one side, it'll usually first, if you catch them early enough, there'll just be a white tail coming off of them. When you start to have the green coming out of the other side of the seed, that is the actual plant growing. But if you just have the white root, you can use a pen or a pencil in your seed trays, just like you're starting other seeds in a seed tray. You've got your soil in there. You can use a pen or pencil, poke a little hole, and then you just gently push the white root into that hole with the seed facing upward and the root going down, and you close in that hole. And then you make sure that's moist. And within a couple days, you'll start to see it starting to grow. And then I'll grow it out in those. I do a 50 cell tray. So I want them to have a big enough spot that I don't have to bump them up again. So if you're growing less than me, I mean, normally I do about 600 to 1,000 seedlings a year. So I use up a lot of space very quickly. But if you're only doing a few, you could put them in like a 4-inch pot to start with. And then I plant them out about 2 to 3 weeks after our last frost date outside. But you want to, once they start growing, you're going to start hardening them off outside, just like your other annuals as well. Yeah. Just take it from inside and put them outside.
Yeah, you don't want to kill them. After doing all that work, you don't want to kill them from a hard sun if they're not used to that.
Yes.
So just this leads me to another question. When you're clearly not keeping all of these 1,000 plants every year, let's say like out of 100, how many would you hope to get that you would actually really like that you would possibly save to the next year?
Well, for me, it's really hard to get rid of them because I love them all,
Okay. Yeah.
especially when I see the bees on them. I'm like, oh, the bees are so happy with this one. But you learn as a hybridizer, you one, can't keep them all. And two, you want high standards for what you're going to release into the world. So I'd say that of 100, I probably keep 10 the first year. And of
Okay.
those 10, the following year, I'm going to probably reduce that into half or even maybe only keep one or two of those.
Okay.
You see them the second year and maybe they've changed, or maybe you say, I don't know why I love that as much last year.
Mhm.
So for me, each year I'm like, okay, I have these 5 whites that were really beautiful from year one, but now I'm looking at my first and second year seedlings. Which are the best whites? Do I need 20 different whites? Which ones do a better job? So you're evaluating them to your other seedlings also, and you're weeding out the ones that don't have as strong of characteristics. So it's a numbers game for sure. So out of 100, you maybe will bring 1 to 5 to market someday.
Mhm. Yeah.
And
So if you,
that's when you're being really strategic too. So because I am really being strategic with what seeds I'm saving, if you're just randomly saving seeds from all your open pollinated ones, or if
Mhm,
you them from a big box store, it might
mhm.
be even a smaller number that you want to keep.
Sure. So yeah, if you're a backyard grower and don't have very big space, you could do seeds because they are exciting, but it's not a very good use of your space. If you want to get amazing plants, it's probably just easier to buy the tubers.
Absolutely, especially if you well, it's really fun to grow them from seed, and the bees love the open centered ones.
Mhm.
But if you are thinking that I'm going to save a bunch of money because tubers are $35 a piece and I can buy 20 seeds for $20, know that if you're needing to cut those flowers, well, one, you can't guarantee what the colors are going to be, and two, you don't know what they're going to look like. And so closed centered dahlias have a much longer vase life than an open centered. So if all of a sudden you end up with 25 open centered dahlias that the bees love, they're probably not going to work well for a CSA subscription where they're
Right.
only going to have a couple day vase life, because you don't want them dropping the petals right
Mm.
away either. So keep that in mind. So it can be worth buying the tubers if you're selling your flowers as cut flowers.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I would imagine also as the years go on, you become a little pickier and pickier with how you're deciding what to keep and what not. I would imagine the numbers that you're going to keep in year 4 or 5 are going to be less than the numbers that you're going to be keeping in year 1, assuming you're growing the same number.
Yes, absolutely.
And
So
that,
I grew less this last year because we reduced our field size for
mhm.
this transition, but I still think I had 200 seedlings, and I'm maybe keeping between 15 and 20.
Okay. Are there
And
some
last year,
that you're so excited about?
there's definitely a few that I'm very excited about. There was one that I just found yesterday as I was cutting others down because I
Huh.
plant my seedlings, well, especially this last year because space was so precious.
Okay.
I planted them about 6 to 8 inches apart,
Mhm.
and some of them got to be like 10 feet tall. And
Mhm.
as I was cutting down this open centered white one that had hundreds of flowers on it that the bees were loving, um, behind it was this lavender lilac purple that was like
Mhm.
a miniature cafe au lait. And it has kind of what we call that diamond dust where they sparkle in the light. And
Yes.
it was so full and so beautiful, had like the 45-degree angle positioning. So
Mhm.
I tagged that one, I labeled it, and I hope that it'll store well and produce. I mean, I haven't dug it yet, so hopefully it'll make
Sure.
good tubers that can store well for next year.
Yeah, that sounds very exciting. I obviously grow lavender as well, and I don't have many lavender colored dahlias, which is weird. I need to get more of them. But yeah, I feel like that's a color that is becoming more and more popular.
I've noticed some of the wedding florists starting to ask for it. I think that
Yes.
next year I'm seeing some more pops of purple and those light yellows, which as a grower, most growers stay away from yellows, but it seems like those buttery yellows are becoming a little bit more popular
Mhm.
right now.
Yeah. Oh, that's so exciting. Well, I hope you find some more treasures in the next little bit, but that's cool that, oh, it's just very cool. Okay, I'm referring back to my notes. If you want to jump in with anything, please feel free to.
Sure. I think it's just part of the fun of the seeds is that you don't know what you're going to get. And growing out multiple from a same variety is also really fun. Some you will notice much stronger traits from the parents than others, where like one variety I grew was an informal decorative, and I got balls, and I had informal decoratives, and I had open centered and all kinds of
Mhm.
different varieties, where I grew seeds from this one dahlia this last year, and I'm not going to say the variety yet, but
Sure.
I noticed that almost every single seedling was so similar. The colors were all different, but the form was so true to the parent. They were all different sizes and colors, but the form on 40
Mhm.
different dahlias.
Oh
Some
my
of them
God.
were bobbleheads and stuff, so I still tossed them, but I couldn't believe how the form was so consistent between all of them.
That's so fascinating.
It is. It's wild. I love
Yeah.
the genetics.
Yeah. Okay. So this is just a random question. Let's say, like for me, I haven't been keeping up with my dahlias, and I'm sure I have some seeds out in my dahlia patch right now, and it's going to freeze tonight. After it freezes, can you still use those seeds, or do I need to grab them before, if I wanted to, before it freezes?
I have never grabbed them after it freezes.
Okay.
So I don't have experience. I have read that that day that it freezes, you can grab them before the plants turn to mush.
Mhm.
Because the thing is if they've already formed the seeds are going to be there, but you don't want them to start rotting because what happens is, and hopefully I can explain this correctly because I'm not a scientist, but
Mhm.
when your dahlia plants freeze at frost or frostmas, as I like to refer to it as, which is just if you've never experienced frostmas, please do yourself a favor and go out and just observe your flowers before the sun hits them.
It's amazing.
It's like Mother Nature's parting gift before your dahlias go to bed for the season.
Mhm.
It just is so magical. As a tired gardener at the end of the season, you're just like, wow, this is beautiful. But what happens is they all freeze. And as they freeze, your dahlias freeze, the atoms start to expand and contract. So I think I'm saying this correctly. As they unthaw, they expand and it causes the color to burst. And so as you see the sun hitting your dahlias later in the day, as the frost starts to thaw, last year I could actually see like the color pigments dropping out of my dahlias. And within an hour after that, everything was brown and mush and flopped over to the ground.
Mhm.
Well, if there's already a black firm seed pod in there, that's not going to burst like the color on the flowers, but all of that moisture that's coming out of the dahlia is going to sit in that seed pod and it's going
Mhm.
to make it just start to rot. So I would say I wouldn't wait any longer than the day of frost. So if you can collect those now, you'll have a better odds of saving.
Right. Right. Yes. So that will be the rest of my day now. Well, not
Perfect.
much even for the dahlias. I don't know if I'm going to get into that. I don't think I will, but it's exciting. You guys are talking about it and I mean, there is so much enjoyment in the surprise, right?
Absolutely. And it's so fun to see so many people doing it right now because there's so many amazing dahlias coming out of it. And
Mm.
it's going to be a really fun, I think, next 5 to 10 years seeing
Right. Yeah. I
everything that
feel
comes
like
of the dahlia.
the whole dahlia world and everything right now is so insanely exciting.
Yes.
So, would you like to talk a little bit about how you dig your dahlias, or maybe labeling them? I thought you had just a couple of nuggets that you would like to share. Obviously, everyone does things a little bit differently, and we have done a couple deep dives into some of the labeling and the digging. But just to hear from your perspective of how you do it where you are located.
Sure. Well, I do offer a course. I have a mini course on digging, dividing, and storing your dahlia tubers. So if anyone wants a more in-depth version of that, they can go on my website. Um, I launched that last year and it's coming back out again shortly and be available soon. So that is 3 modules that will walk you through everything. But to give you the quick, short
Mhm.
version of it today, as I was just saying with frostmas, as the color bursts out of your dahlias, everything turns to mush and turns to brown. So what was a Cornell or a Blizzard or a Cafe au lait is not going to be recognizable after frost. Everything is going to turn brown. So if you have not had a frost yet and you have not labeled your dahlias, my number one piece of advice is label your dahlias now so you know what everything is. So for me, I have landscape stakes that are about 12-inch markers, and I have written on both sides of them. One, I've used a garden pen. The other side, I've written in pencil. I've actually found that pencil holds up better for me than a garden pen. And I will write the variety at the start of the row. And so for me, I try to grow at least 10 of every variety. So I'll make sure that those tags are still there.
Uh-huh.
And then I will do another check through and I'll check the help. So are there any dahlias that I don't want to keep that maybe didn't perform well, or if they look virused, I'm going to pull them then and there. But pulling those plants before frost, so you make sure you take those out of your stock, is super helpful. If it's though one that maybe you just had a bunch of blown centers and you don't want to take it because it's supporting another plant, let's say, I will take flagging tape. So I use flagging tape. And I use them especially with my seeds. I used to just use all orange flagging tape and I could mark everything. Well, what I realized was after I dug them up, if I didn't have them labeled and I didn't have them photographed, I would found myself in January going, what color is this seedling? And then my seedlings were all planted together. So now I buy flagging tape in a package that is all color coded. So I have white flagging tape, purple, pink, orange, red, and then I have blue and green. And so I use green for anything that I'm not going to keep. So if it's supporting another plant, maybe I've got an open-centered seedling, but if I take it down, it's going to knock over the others right now. So I can flag it with the green, and I just tie that around the base so that when I go through and dig, I know, okay, this is one I'm not going to save. With my seedlings that I'm keeping, all my white ones get tagged with a white flagging tape at the base so that when I divide them in the wintertime, I can say, oh, this is a white dahlia. So next year, all my white seedlings will be planted together and all my pink seedlings. And then I found that if it's like a coral, I'll take a red and an orange flagging tape and I'll tie them together. And so that way I can color code, because my brain has so much going on right now that I haven't had time to take notes of every single variety, but I can look at that flagging tape and say, I know what color family that belongs to. And then I also use the 6-inch labels, plastic plant labels, and I write garden pen on one side and pencil again on the other. So all my seedlings have a tag in front of them, and I have that flagging tape also that I can write the variety on them. And so that way they are double and triple labeled and ready to go for when they all turn to mush or brown and dry out after frost. You asked about the digging part. I'm in zone 7B. I know some people in my area that say, oh, I leave them in the ground every year and they come back. Well, I'm a commercial grower. One, I sell my tubers, so I need to dig them. Two, I can't risk as a commercial grower losing mine, so I dig them every year. But by digging them, I can divide them. And when I divide them, I can multiply my dahlias, and that gives me even more. So if I've taken good care of a plant, and I tend to only keep varieties around that give me a good amount of tubers in return. So I'll usually get between 5 and 10 tubers from a plant. So by digging it up, that one tuber that cost me anywhere from $15 to $35, if I can turn that into 5 more tubers, I have 5 times my investment from that first year. I can either sell those, and I sell with a commercial license, so I'm licensed by the Department of Agriculture, or you could gift them, or you could just grow your collection. So if you only had one of a variety, now you can have 5 of that variety. So it's a really great way to multiply your collection. Because I have so much going on in the fall, after frost, I will cut my dahlias down. I leave a couple inches of the stalk so that I can have something to grab to pull them out of the ground. But after I cut them back, I let them sit for about a week, unless I'm getting a lot of rain or snow. Letting them sit gives them time to cure and lets the tubers finish hardening off. You technically don't have to wait till frost to dig your dahlias. Your dahlias need approximately 120 days of growing time in the ground to have viable tubers for the following season. If you're in a warmer climate, you could just cut them back to the ground after frost and then mulch around them or cover them with like a silage tarp. You don't want them sitting in the ground all wet. So if you live above zone 8 and you're like, I don't want to dig my dahlias up, make sure you have well-draining soil and you want to cut them down so that they're not rotting up above, and then cover them and protect them for the winter time. And if you can leave them in the ground, you'll get them earlier. Some reasons you might want to dig them up in zone 8 and above, though, is you always start that single tuber you first plant is the mother tuber. That one will start to deteriorate over time as it continues growing out. I call them the baby tubers that go with the mother. Those children of the mother will start to multiply too. So if you wait 2 or 3 years, you're going to have a massive clump to dig up. And not all of those tubers in that clump will have eyes as it starts to break down in the center. So dividing it up, you again can multiply, but you can take out the parts that are starting to deteriorate and rot. So like I never sell the mother. The mother tuber usually is not as vigorous as the babies the following year. I'll plant them myself if they're still good, if they haven't rotted.
Yeah, no, that's good. I know someone had messaged me about that very question. So thanks for bringing that up. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I dig mine. I leave them in a whole clump. I put them in a crate. I actually don't even knock the dirt off of them anymore. I'm fortunate. I have a walk-in cooler. My cooler is set to 42, 43 degrees at 90% humidity. You ideally need to store them between 80 and 90% humidity. You need a storage space that is above freezing and ideally below 50. If it's warmer than 50, you're going to start to have them wake up and start trying to grow before you get them planted again. So for me, I just put my crates with the clumps in my cooler. And then in February, I take them out, I wash them, and then I start dividing them. And then I have my tuber sale in the springtime. But if you want to, you can always wash and divide them in the fall. I've noticed that when you don't dig them the day you cut them down, so you let them sit for about 5 days, they also start to sprout new eyes. So the eyes are visible right away after you've dug them up. And then again in the spring as they start waking up. So if you're a novice at this and you're like, this is really intimidating, one, you can either take my digging and dividing and storing class or wait until the eyes are visible. Because if the eyes are not popping out yet, it's a lot harder to know where to divide and you don't want to save a blind tuber. So
yeah. Oh, that's such good advice. I personally, I don't grow that many, but I like to dig them in the fall and then just get them done with.
And then do you tuck them away, and where do you store yours?
So I have a little unusual situation. My floral cooler is not done yet. I thought it would be done 3 years ago, but my husband's busy doing other things. He tells me it's coming, but either way, so we are really cold where we are. We're zone 4B, 5A, depending on the year, but I've got a garage that's attached to my house. It's unheated, but it does have an insulated garage door. So although the garage freezes, I actually have a room above the garage that's connected to my house. And it's what we use it for is an unheated pantry. And it very, very rarely freezes in there. And I just have one of those little, I don't even know what they're called, but the tiny little thermometer things that's like hooked up to my phone so I can see what the humidity and what the temperature is. And on the days and the nights where it gets really cold, like 40 or 50 below, which doesn't happen every year, but those days I just keep the door open to the pantry. Otherwise, it really hangs out at about 43 degrees all winter long.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah,
so
it's amazing. So
thermometers are called Govee.
Okay,
is the brand I use. But they're great. They're like $12 on Amazon.
Yeah.
And measures the temperature and humidity levels.
Yeah, they're really helpful. And because I don't have a ton of space in there, that's another reason why I divide them in the fall. And then for me personally, I just put them in peat moss and put them in a bag in cardboard bags. And then I just write on the bag what the variety is.
Perfect. And then you want to always check on those in storage to make sure that they're not rotting. I like to check on mine every 2 weeks. And then the other thing, if you are storing in your garage or a cement area, make sure you don't have them sitting on the cement because that can suck the moisture out of them. And then you'll notice your dahlias start to shrivel up as well.
Yep. I lost some by putting them on the cement just for 2 days was all, because I thought I was digging all of them and washing them and I put them on the floor in my garage. And just for those 2 days, I didn't realize that it really affected them.
It happens so fast.
So fast. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, but such good advice. Yay. it feels so empowering to know like how to best grow these flowers. It's so cool.
Yes. And it's so different in every growing region too. Or even like you might find that you and your neighbor have different ways of storing. So if you're newer to this and you haven't found a method that works perfectly for you yet, I say experiment. So like try one variety or half of a variety in vermiculite and the other half of that variety in peat moss, or you could mix in the thirds and do vermiculite, peat moss, and pine shavings and see which one holds up best for you, because there is no one way to grow
No,
dahlias or to store dahlias. So finding the method that works for you is super important. There's going to be 10 different people telling you 10 different ways to do things. But if you find the way that works for you, that's the way you should do it.
yes. And don't be afraid to reach out to your neighbors, because if you don't have a space appropriate for growing or for storing your tubers, sometimes like in these old farmhouses, they still have cellars that they used for food 100 years ago. And sometimes I know some of my other friends, they just use other friends or other family members' places to store their tubers. And then they don't check on them throughout the winter, but it's more like well, if they survive, that's great. And if they don't, that's great too. So
That's a great idea.
yeah, it's kind of fun. Okay, we are pretty close to time here. Would you like to talk about your membership a little bit? I know
Sure.
it's such an exciting thing, and I feel like there's so much goodness in here. It needs a little bit of attention.
Well, thank you for that opportunity. So last year, I guess it was in January, I think it was, I rolled out the Dahlia Patch, which is an online learning community. The idea is I was originally going to create a full course on how to grow dahlias. And I realized because there's not just one right way to do things, I thought, what if there was a membership? What if there was a community where people could gather live, get to know others in their growing zones, attend live trainings that were applicable to what was going on in the growing season, and then have a spot to also ask questions? It's like, I'm going to create the Dahlia Patch. And so the idea of the Dahlia Patch was kind of born from this idea of wanting to create a course to help others and educate others. But instead, what it is every month, the first week of the month, I go live with a topic that is applicable to what is going on in the Northern Hemisphere's growing season. All of those get recorded. So within 24 hours of the recording, you can join live or you can come back and watch the replay. Even if you attend the live, you can come back and watch the replay again. And then we have what's called a Dahlia chat, and that usually takes place once a month in the morning. Anyone who's free can hop on, bring their cup of coffee or their tea, their dahlias that are growing, or sort some seeds. And it's just a time to connect with others. There's been some neat connections where people have discovered, oh, look, you have a flower stand in my same community. And then they can meet up offline or just learn from one another, because we have people in growing zone 4, we have growing zone 10 and 9. We have all of these different zones represented, as well as different skill levels. We have everyone from those that are growing their first few in pots to those that are growing 800 dahlias and commercial hybridizers. So it's really exciting to see people be able to help others. So it's not just me giving advice. I do lead the trainings. My hope is to start bringing on some other educators for some trainings in the group. So those are the first 2 things that happen each month. Then we have our live Q&A session where members can pre-submit questions. We answer those pre-submitted questions, and then we open it up for a Q&A. And that's the 3rd Thursday of the month. And then we do a Dahlia happy hour where once a month, just like the coffee chat, the idea is so people have varying schedules. People can hop on in the afternoon, bring their kombucha or their mocktail or their beer, whatever their beverage of choice is, and visit with other dahlia growers. People like to show their bouquets. And then we also have challenges throughout the month. So whether it's spotting the beneficials or having a bouquet making challenge or digging and dividing your dahlias, there's different challenges to keep you engaged with the community. So we have both an annual and a monthly membership. And I'd like to invite anyone that is listening to today's training, if you'd like to check out the Dahlia Patch, you can use the code GROW24 for 1 month free in the Dahlia Patch. And we'll provide a link to that as well.
Yeah, it's just such a really amazing community. I'm excited,
You're
honestly, to
part of
be
it.
part of it. I am part of it. Yes, I haven't taken part in as many as I really anticipated. This year has been so busy for me, but I'm really, really looking forward to joining up with more of the chats and the show and tells and everything. It's just really a lovely community that you have brought together, Jennifer. I love it.
Thank you. And the thing is, if you've been busy and you can always go back and watch the replays.
Yes, that I do love that because in the winter is when I paint mostly. And when I'm painting, that's when I listen to all the everything. And so I will absolutely 100% do that.
I love it. Well,
So yeah,
thank you for the opportunity.
oh my gosh, yeah. And we as a community are always looking for more members. So yeah, if you're even interested in any way, shape or form, yeah, I really encourage you to use the free month membership and see if it's something that you like. And then that's who doesn't like to talk about dahlias.
Yes, and it's a positive, supportive community. There is
Mhm.
no negativity that is not tolerated in this group. So it's a place to lift everyone up. There's no dumb questions, and we're just here to support everyone's journey, both through the trainings and the community connections of networking.
Yeah. Oh, I just love it. Yay. That's so amazing. Okay. So to finish up, I just basically ask everyone two final questions. And one is the hard one, but if you could only grow five different types of, or five different varieties of dahlias, what would they be?
Oh, that is a good question. Well, it's maybe unfair what I'm going to say, but they'd be five of my varieties. I have
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. You don't have to even give the reason, but yeah. So explain a little bit, maybe even color or shape, or you can keep it secret if you want to. It's up to
so
you.
I primarily sell to wedding florists is my
Okay.
main client
Uh-huh.
outside of selling dahlia tubers. And I've never been a fan of Sweet Natalie. I stopped growing it a
Mhm.
few years ago. So that was what started my breeding journey is I really wanted a dahlia. My florist would buy my Sweet Natalies. I grew hundreds of them, but
Mhm.
they had so many that were wasted because they were clock faced or they were face down. And then
Mhm.
cafe LAs, the florists were like, well, they're too big to work into arrangements. They're beautiful. We can use them for centerpieces and standing arrangements, but we can't put them in the bridal bouquet because they take up too much space.
Yeah.
So I set out on this mission that I was going to get a blush dahlia. So I've been focusing on that for the last few years. And I probably have about 10 to 15 of those that I really love, everything from
Mhm.
ball shape to informal decoratives. And I actually have a few little miniature ones too. And they're in their second and third years. I have not come up with a hybridization name yet.
Mhm.
Our flower farm is the Flowering Farmhouse. We're actually going to rebrand to the Flowering Farmhouse on D because our new property is on D Highway, and that's part
Nice.
of the Hood River Fruit Loop. So
Mhm.
trying to figure out like what am I going to call my dahlias. The Flowering Farmhouse is kind of long. My name, Jennifer Gulizia, isn't as well known. So I'm not sure what my name is going to be. So if anyone listening has any suggestions, I am all ears on that. So I've got a list of about 20 names for dahlias, but I haven't named any of them yet. And then
Mhm.
my favorite color of dahlia is kind of that salmony coral. And I have a few new ones this year, but I would say that the ones that I have been really loving, um, that I grew this year for the first time, Copper Boy was
Mhm.
beautiful. Not that coral color. It's more of a burgundy, but oh my gosh, is it stunning for fall. And maybe it's because we're in the fall that I'm just loving the fall colors after being so busy this year. Like anything cozy is just like a warm hug. So
Mhm.
Copper Boy, Ferncliff Rusty, one of my dog's names is Rusty, and I
Love it.
absolutely love Ferncliff Rusty this year. Cornell Bronze is like hands down one of the most trusted, tried and true varieties. My florist buys so many of it for fall weddings.
Mhm.
Um, in terms of like a tried and true variety, Blizzard is my go-to white for
Mhm.
weddings. Up until now, my florists have mostly been using my varieties this year, which has been really exciting.
Exciting for you.
Uh,
Yes.
they're like, what are these varieties? I'm like, they don't even have names yet. So that's been fun harvesting more of my own than those. What's one more? Oh, Odyssey was a new one to me this year. And it's this little, it would be a good one for you because it's kind of that lavender lilac. Some
Mhm.
depending on the temperature, it would go from blush to like a lilac lavender.
Oh,
And it's
pretty.
a small ball. And it pumped out so many blooms, and my florists loved that one for kind of the Victorian weddings this year. I mean, I could go on and give you another 20, but
I know
half of
it's so
those
fun.
fine.
It's kind of fun. I feel like it's going to be so fun to kind of, you know, and Copper Boy and the Cornell Bronze really are popping up in a lot of people's favorite, with
Interesting.
probably the Cornell Bronze being number one. But at the end, yeah, I'll make a list and see how many of them overlap. It's just super fascinating.
My advice for anyone listening to these lists is now is a great time to figure out where you have gaps in your colors.
100%.
These lists to make your list so that when the tuber sales start happening this late winter and spring, you can jump on those colors that you've heard people say are tried and true varieties.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And then the last question to finish up is, if you had one piece of time-saving advice with anywhere in the dahlia growing process, and maybe it's something that you already talked about, but what would you like to pass on?
Sure. I would say that if you are growing dahlias to sell, whether that's growing dahlias to sell tubers or to sell to your florists or having a CSA subscription, you need to, instead of trying to grow hundreds of varieties, focus on growing quantities of good quality varieties. Because if you can grow, like for me, I grow 100 Cornell Bronze. When I'm making my CSA subscription, I have more than enough Cornell Bronze that I can harvest that every bouquet can look identical. And so I can have a recipe so I can quickly put things together versus having to harvest one flower from this variety and one flower from this and another two from here. I can have 200 Cornell Bronze harvested in a short amount of time, and I can keep things simple. And I can also fulfill big orders from florists because they can say, I need 200 Cornell Bronze, or I need 200 bronze dahlias. I can say, great, I'll go cut 200 Cornell Bronze. And it works easier for their palettes too than trying to figure out, you've got 3 of this color and 2 of this color. Can I mesh these together for the bride's palette?
Yeah. Oh, that's great advice. Yes.
I'd say if you're smaller scale, having a minimum of 5 of a variety. So instead of trying to buy 20 varieties this year, focus on getting at least 5 tubers of specific varieties. 10 is even better if you can afford 10 of a variety.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And for everything. It's such an honor and a gift to be able to have you here sharing the things with us. So, if our viewers want to find you, where do they find you on social? And then just, reiterate where we can get the membership and your class, and hop on your email list. So I will let you talk.
Absolutely. Well, there's lots of places you can find me. So the podcast you can find on any podcast streaming platform, which is the Backyard Bouquet Podcast. And now that we're done moving, every week our weekly podcast is back out again. We'll have another one dropping. The goal is every Tuesday or Wednesday. And then
I didn't realize it was so often. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, that is the goal. The goal is 52 episodes this year. And then our website is thefloweringfarmhouse.com. I am also going to be documenting our farm journey on there. So now that we're settling down, the goal is a journal entry every week talking about lessons learned and our process of building out the farm and rebuilding the soil health. Pretty much on every social platform, I'm the Flowering Farmhouse. So Instagram, the Flowering Farmhouse, Pinterest, the Flowering Farmhouse, Facebook, the Flowering Farmhouse, YouTube, the Flowering Farmhouse. And then the Dahlia Patch you can get to through my website, and I will provide a link to you also to access that free month on the Dahlia Patch with the code GROW24. And then I will end with a little teaser to stay tuned. We have a really huge, big, exciting announcement coming hopefully by the end of October that is just so exciting, and I hope is going to make big ripples in the flower community.
That's amazing. Yay. So you want to be connected to you, Jennifer.
I would love to have you along on my journey, and I'd love to be able to share what I learned with all of you. So thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you, flower friends, for joining us on another episode of the Backyard Bouquet. I hope you've enjoyed the inspiring stories and valuable gardening insights we've shared today. Whether you're cultivating your own backyard blooms or supporting your local flower farmer, You're contributing to the local flower movement, and we're so happy to have you growing with us. If you'd like to stay connected and continue this blossoming journey with local flowers, don't forget to subscribe to the Backyard Bouquet Podcast. I'd be so grateful if you would take a moment to leave us a review of this episode. And finally, please share this episode with your garden friends. Until next time, keep growing, keep blooming, and remember that every bouquet starts right here in the backyard.